Welcome back to another SCP Those Twisted Pines reading, dear researchers. Today we'll be reading The Elusive Andersons Part 2 and 3, Finding and Meeting Anderson. Now without further ado, Finding Anderson. Agent Clarissa Shaw stood silently looking into the contents of a Site-64 interrogation room. Sitting at the table inside was a Saker who called itself Miles Wilson, an android designed to resemble an African-American man in his mid to late 20s. Agent Shaw brushed a strand of her blonde hair out of her eyes as she reviewed the contents of a file she held in her arms. With a minuscule smile, she pushed up her thick-rimmed glasses and entered the interrogation room. "Afternoon, Miles," Shaw began as she took a seat at the table, neatly placing the folder in front of her. Miles immediately looked away, his gaze focused anywhere else rather than risk eye contact with the agent. "Hello, Miss Starling," Miles mumbled. "You can call me Agent Shaw," Shaw began. "I told you already that was just a cover." "I liked you better when you were Miss Starling," Miles replied. "You seemed nicer then." Miles then paused. His eyes looked around the room, but still refused to make eye contact. "This is a Silence of the Lambs reference, right?" he asked. "Agent Starling?" "Correct," Shaw said with a smirk. "Fitting, don't you think?" "Whatever you say," said Miles. "I don't have anything else to tell you." "Oh, I doubt that," she said as she opened the file and scanned its contents. "I think there is still a lot you can tell me, like what your particular purpose as a Saker unit was." "I don't know what you're talking about." Miles shook his head. "I'm sure I would know if I was a robot. Clearly, I'm not." Shaw sighed, pulling a photograph from the file and slid it across the table. "What do you see here, Miles?" she asked. Miles looked down. The photo was of him in a college baseball uniform, standing among several other players. He smirked as he slid the photo back across the table. "You have a picture of me from when I played baseball for the Beavers. So what?" he said, his gaze shifting to the one-way mirror. "That picture was taken for a newspaper article that was published in 1998, Shaw replied as she placed the photo back in the file. "You're how old? 23, 25? You should be in your late 30s by now, but it appears you haven't aged. On top of that, my friends did some digging. The Miles Wilson pictured here died in 2001 from small cell carcinoma." Miles closed his eyes tightly and violently shook his head. Shaw could hear him mutter, "Stop," under his breath. "I think someone in Miles's family is very close to Anderson, if not Anderson themselves," Shaw continued. "And I think Anderson made you as a surrogate. You're designed to look and act as human as possible. Anderson hasn't terminated you yet because you're too special. I wouldn't be surprised if—" "Why are you doing this?" Miles interrupted, slamming his fist down on the table with a sickening thud. His eyes filled with tears as he finally made eye contact. "Why are you guys trying so hard to tell me I'm something I'm not? What does it matter to you if I'm a human or a robot? At the end of the day, I've still told you everything I know." "As I said before, I doubt that," Shaw said coolly. "I imagine we'll find out soon enough." Agent Shaw sat in the office of Agent Sasha Merlo, leader of MTF Gamma-13 Asimov's Lawbringers. While Shaw sat back in her chair, relaxed and with a cup of coffee, Merlo's eyes remained glued to the phone, biting her nails. A portion of the MTF had been deployed to the residence of Jeffrey Wilson, Miles's father, to bring the man into Foundation custody. Now they both waited to hear the mission status. The room remained silent, save for the ticking of Merlot's electric blue clock on the wall. Ah! Merlot ecstatically shouted as the phone rang, the sudden influx of noise forcing Shaw to jump and spill some of her coffee. Shaw attempted to regain her composure as Merlot flipped the phone onto speaker. Go for Merlot!
Merlot, this is Carter. We're at the Wilson residence.
A man's voice came over the speaker, and heavy rain could be heard in the background.
It's gone.
Shaw watched the color drain from Merlot's face. Her smile morphed into an expression much more solemn. What?
It's gone, Carter repeated. The house is burned to the ground. There's nothing here. We're combing the area, but I don't think the search will.
Merlot hung up. Slowly, she sank back into her office chair and spun around, turning away from her companion. Just once. I want us to be faster. There's still a chance. If the rest of the team combs the area, maybe... Shaw began, only to stop talking when Merlot shook her head. The man's house burnt down. Something tells me it wasn't because he left the goddamn stove on, Merlot replied. No, Wilson knew we were coming. He's long gone. Merlot then got to her feet and began to head towards the door. Do you want backup? Shaw asked. I should do this alone, Merlot called back and disappeared into the hall. Edgar Holman, Site Director. Merlot took a deep breath as she read the nameplate on the door, and then gave a sharp knock.
It's open,
called a man's voice from inside. Merlot took a moment to compose herself before stepping inside. The office itself was quite large. Numerous shelves lined the walls, each filled with minor anart items that had been brought to Site 64 over the years, but didn't require official object classification. At the back of the room was a large desk covered in a slew of files, each labeled Clayton. Sitting in a rather large chair behind the desk was a tall, sharply dressed man with slicked back hair.
Merlot?
Holman asked. His voice was a deep bass. Director, Merlot said with a half-hearted chuckle. We've had some developments with Wilson.
Oh? Go on.
Holman quietly placed the folder he was reading down and made it clear she had his undivided attention. Gone, Merlot cringed. The residence was burned to the ground. Carter is having the rest of the crew comb the area, but you already know how that will go. Holman nodded in agreement. A sympathetic smile came to his face.
We just can't win, can we?
Maybe not this time, but we still have the Saker. I'm sure that we haven't exhausted that avenue yet. Holman's smile quickly formed into a frown.
About that, Holman said with a sigh. I just got word from Overwatch. The Saker is to be transferred to Site 81.
Excuse me? Merlot nervously chuckled.
I'm sorry, Sasha, Holman replied. It's out of my hands. Security reasons.
Those motherfuckers broke into Site 19? Merlot shouted as she banged her hand on her desk. How the hell is Site 81 going to help? You're just going to let that bald quack take our prize. We lost 3 agents during the last raid. Aside from that punk out at Site 84, Gamma 13 is the authority on Anderson.
Agent Merlot.
Holman's voice filled the room like a sonic boom. Merlot took several steps back from the table. Merlot remained silent for a few moments as Holman took a few deep breaths. Edgar, please, said Merlot. Don't let them do this to us. Holman closed his eyes and slowly shook his head.
There's nothing more I can do. I'm sorry.
Merlot nodded in understanding. With a sigh, she turned and began to head for the door.
Oh, Sasha,
said Holman as Merlot began to disappear into the hall.
Remember that you're in charge of Miles until the transfer. Do with that information what you will.
Merlot gave Holman a sly smile and nod before quietly disappearing into the hall. There was work to be done. Agent Merlot sat alone in her office. Her eyes glazed over as she furiously scanned document after document from Anderson's POI file. There's got to be something here, she mumbled to herself. Merlot's phone then rang. Go for Merlot, she impatiently shouted as she picked up the receiver.
This is the office of Sasha Merlot, yes?
Asked a deep metallic male voice.
I have to say that it's very nice to have a chance to finally speak with you.
Merlot froze. Who is this? She asked.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. I'm Anderson, he replied. I believe you're familiar with my work?
There was a pause. Merlot wasn't sure what to say. This was Anderson? Why should I believe you? Merlot hesitantly asked.
Well, if you put me on speakerphone, I could disable the AMR unit that's been in your office the last 2 days.
Merlot immediately dropped the phone and reached for a pistol, quickly scanning the entire room before she heard the laughter coming from the other end.
Yeah, I was just kidding.
Anderson chuckled. You have my attention, Merlot hissed. Why call just now?
Oh, right. Well, you see, you are right to think that Miles is very valuable to me. I was sort of hoping that maybe I could pick him up.
You're serious?
As cancer, Anderson replied.
That's not going to happen, said Merlot. Her eyes were wide in confusion.
I thought you might say that.
Anderson sighed.
I wish this wasn't always so difficult.
I'm sorry? Merlot asked. I'm making this difficult for you?
Don't get me wrong, Sasha, said Anderson. I really do like what it is you and the Foundation do. I think it's the bee's knees. You guys do things I'd never want to touch, you know? Containing eldritch horrors and such. I just wish you weren't so quick to squash the little inventors. Given enough time, even anomalous technology becomes mainstream. I mean, Christ. If we were cavemen, you guys would try to contain fire because it would be too spooky for your tastes. You know what I'm saying?
Merlot didn't respond.
This was Anderson? Well, fuck it then,
Anderson said after several more moments of silence.
I guess I'll just have to come get him myself. I was really hoping it wouldn't come to that. Oh well. I guess I'll see you soon, Sasha. Tell Starling hello for me.
The line went dead. Merlot then felt something move on her neck. Out of reflex, she quickly snatched at the spot and threw the object away. A small black ball bounced against the wall and came to rest on the ground. The object quickly produced a set of legs and a red spot for an eye. Merlot recognized it as one of Anderson's AMR recon drones. In a flash, the tiny robot scaled the wall of her office and disappeared into the ventilation system. Merlot's mouth hung open for a few moments before she slumped back into her chair. Well, fuck. That was Anderson. Meeting Anderson. Agent Sasha Merlot yawned as she slowly moved through the halls of Site 64, a mug of stale coffee in her hands. She had not gotten much sleep over the past few days. The current rush to extract as much usable data from Miles Wilson and the looming possibility of an attack from the POI known as Anderson had created an environment extremely hostile to the concept of rest. Merlot stopped in front of the door to her office and rubbed her eye with her free hand before stepping inside. As the door closed behind her, she took a sip of the acrid liquid in her mug before noticing that she was not alone. As another individual was reading a file left on her desk. Standing behind her desk was a masculine figure of medium height. It bore a bright red shirt underneath a charcoal blazer with matching slacks. Its skin was the color of ivory and completely hairless, veins visible beneath the room's bright light. Its head was without ears, and its face was secured behind a silver comedy mask. The individual stood up straight and looked at an unimpressive watch on its right wrist.
Oh, you're back early,
It said in a deep metallic male voice.
Your average coffee break is not supposed to be over for at least another 15 minutes.
Merlot recognized the voice in an instant. She immediately dropped her mug. Her hand reached towards her pistol before she could get her fingers around the grip. The unwelcome guest had reached into his pocket and flung globs of fluorescent orange goo at her. As the first glob made contact, she felt her hand stick to her chest, the substance hardening instantaneously into a shell. The remaining globs hit her in the legs and on her other arm, encasing her in a bright orange cocoon. Agent Merlot looked up. Her breath caught in her throat as a million scenarios ran through her mind, each ending in a progressively worse outcome for both her and the rest of Gamma 13. The man stood above her, a glob of neon blue goo in one hand as he held up a finger to the mouth of his mask.
You should remember what the blue stuff does from your run-in with Phineas,
said the intruder.
If you scream or call for help, I will lob this into your face.
Merlot immediately fell silent, her gaze unwavering as she watched her assailant reach into the inner pocket of his jacket and place a small silver orb on Merlot's desk. The orb immediately sprouted several mechanical legs and revealed itself to be one of Anderson's Ammer recon drones. The man made a small gesture, and the Ammer began to issue a small hum. He then placed the blue goo back in his jacket pocket, and then set about propping Merlot against the wall.
Okay, he said. You can speak freely now.
Why? Merlot asked, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the Ammer on her desk.
I call this little guy Benny,
he replied. The Ammer waved at her with one of its many legs.
He's a custom Ammer I built myself. One of his features is a noise cancellation device. Nothing we say will be audible outside this room.
The man then returned to the area behind Merlot's desk and took a seat in a chair.
You probably already guessed this by now, but I'm Anderson,
he said as he sat down.
Pleased to meet you, Sasha, I guess.
The pleasure's all mine, Merlot replied flatly. Anderson gave an awkward nod of agreement and then turned his attention to the open file on her desk. The room fell silent, save for Benny's low hum. After several minutes, Merlot finally opted to speak. "So that's it then?" she asked. "You just going to read your file and walk out of here?"
Well, I'm not gonna kill you if that's what you think, Anderson replied with a chuckle. You guys all seem to think I'm some kind of James Bond villain, or I'm just a small business owner. To be honest, I was hoping to avoid a confrontation like this entirely. You, just came back too early.
Small business owners generally don't manufacture automated sentry turrets whose designs break the laws of entropy, said Merlot. Anderson shrugged in response.
This one does.
Fair enough. Merlot rolled her eyes. That still doesn't answer the question of how you plan on getting out of here with Miles. You're not just going to be able to walk out the front door.
Sasha. Anderson snickered. I walked in the front door. Getting Miles out of here is, not too far out of the realm of possibility. In fact...
Anderson paused as he pulled a small black remote out of his jacket pocket and pressed a button. Within a few moments, a low rumble could be heard elsewhere in the facility, as well as gunshots. Alarm klaxons went off a few seconds later. Anderson then proceeded to neatly place all the papers back in the file and stepped away from the desk.
Anyway,
he continued as he began to make his way towards the door. Benny quickly rolled off the table, then crawled up his leg and into his jacket pocket.
Whoever put the file together did a bang-up job. I didn't know you guys had so much dirt on me. Congratulations.
Anderson opened the door and stepped into the hall.
Remind me to, buy you a drink next time we meet.
Anderson called back into the room as the door closed. Merlot then listened to the alarm klaxons blaring and the occasional gunshots. "I'm so fired," she said with a heavy sigh. Agent Merlot then closed her eyes and waited for someone to find her. Agent Clarissa Shaw had been on her way to the holding cell where they were keeping Miles Wilson. She carried a new set of interview questions, preparing to take advantage of what little time remained before Gamma-13's most recent catch was transferred to the care of Site-81. It was then that she heard the alarm klaxons and gunshots, followed by a low rumble, which slowly built into a cacophony. Curiously, she turned to investigate. She felt her jaw drop. Rapidly approaching was a swarm of thousands of Hammer recon drones. Shaw turned to run, but before she could travel more than a few feet, the swarm had already engulfed her. She felt something stab into her leg, and within a few moments she was on the floor, unable to move. Sharp pinpricks covered her entire body, and she screamed, only to have her cry drowned out by the combined noise of the robotic swarm. After an eternity passed, the swarm was gone. Within a few moments, Shaw regained control of her extremities and neatly returned her glasses to the spot on her nose. One of the lenses were scratched, but otherwise the thin-rimmed eyewear was unharmed. Shaw looked around for any sign of the horde of drones, but saw nothing save the empty hallway. Getting to her feet, the agent slowly proceeded to make her way towards Miles's cell. By the time she arrived at the correct cell, Shaw found the door had been jammed open. Several of Site-64's security personnel lay scattered on the ground. As they struggled to stand, Shaw realized they had each had a similar run-in with the swarm. Carefully drawing her pistol, Shaw stepped inside the cell, only to find it empty with the covering to the ventilation duct shredded. The smell of blood then drew Shaw's attention to the room's cot. Laying on top, neatly folded as if it were clothing, was Miles's skin. At a large table in a brightly lit conference room that lacked windows, 5 individuals silently sat awaiting a 6th and 7th guest. Sitting at the head of the table was a muscular man in his 40s named Isaac, easily the most business-savvy man in the room. He formerly helped run a weapons design firm based in Los Angeles. A near constant frown adorned his face. To Isaac's right sat a short woman with shoulder-length brunette hair, faint blue eyes, and an ever-warm smile. Her name was Medea, and she had been a professor of robotics at some university in Tennessee, though the other individuals in the room had long forgotten its name. Sitting by her side was her adopted son, Jason, a child prodigy in robotics. He was a tall, lanky young man in his mid-20s whose head was covered in curly, blonde hair. A thick pair of glasses covered his eyes, and a small smirk was permanently parked on his face. Across the table from Jason sat Phineas, an old man who appeared to be in his 50s, with a bald head, a long white beard, and almost translucent skin. He was both an artist and a tinkerer, and every time he moved, a faint mechanical whirling could be heard. Finally, next to Phineas sat a short, portly, middle-aged man with dark skin and a permanent expression of worry. A specialist in artificial intelligence, he was the man responsible for the existence of the Saker units. His name was Jeffrey Wilson. Before too much longer, the single door to the room opened and a swarm of armored drones poured in, clustering at a spot in the corner. The drones piled into a column nearly 2 meters high. Various electrical sounds and noises of metal on metal could be heard at the pillar's center as the drones vibrated with activity. After a few more moments, the drones dispersed, pouring out the door and leaving the white endoskeleton of a Saker unit at its place. Upon the egress of the last drone, Anderson stepped into the room. The prodigal son hath returned, he said as he slowly made his way towards the end of the table, opposite Isaac. The room's bright lighting reflected off the silver paint of his comedy mask. As promised, I managed to bring Miles back too. Jeffrey was already in the corner with the endoskeleton, frantically inspecting every square inch of its white frame. A few seconds later, Jeffrey held the Saker in a tight bear hug. "Dad?" Miles's voice came from the Saker. Jeffrey began to sob. "I'm so sorry, Miles, for all that you've been through and all that's left to be done," Jeffrey mumbled. "You do know what you need to do now, right?" Medea asked. Jeffrey let go of the Saker and dried his eyes with a nod. "Saker 00, he said to the robot. "Report to designated maintenance site and shut down until further orders." The Saker mechanically nodded and left the room. Jeffrey then returned to the conference table and placed his head in his hands. "Anyway," began Jason, "shall we proceed?" "We shall," returned Anderson. "I take it that Isaac shared with everyone Mr. Marshall's offer?" "I have," Isaac answered. "And, I am willing to bet that during the discussion that followed, everyone but, Isaac and Jeffrey was against accepting the offer." "That is correct," replied Phineas. "I'm sorry, Vincent, but that's just a no-go." Anderson sighed and turned away in his chair. "Friends," said Anderson, "when I originally approached each of you to begin this little firm, I did so with a promise. That promise was to provide each of you with the freedom to create what you were denied everywhere else. To this day, I have largely been able to keep that promise, but that is a task that has become increasingly difficult with each sale we make. Anderson then turned back to face his colleagues.
It would be foolish for us to assume that we are as nimble now as we were when we founded this company. More and more of our sales are turning into Foundation things. At this rate, it will only be a matter of time until one of us is captured. Medea is from another universe. What do you think the Foundation will do if they capture her? Phineas, I hope you like being a quadruple amputee, because they'll take your prosthetics away if they capture you. If they don't kill Isaac, Jeffrey, or Jason, they'll surely wipe your memories and leave you on the side of a highway in Indiana.
Anderson shook his head.
Mr. Marshall's offer is quite generous. We are still in charge of the manufacturing, and we're still in creative control of the products. They just want the distribution rights and access to our clientele.
I refuse to work on anyone's terms beside my own, Phineas interrupted. I will not let you bully me into this, Vincent. Not this time.
I'm not trying to bully any of you, Anderson coolly replied. You should know by now that I consider all of you my equals in this enterprise, and if you all truly feel that accepting this offer will create irreconcilable differences, I will drop the subject. I just can't guarantee my original promise otherwise.
The room fell silent for a few moments. One by one, Anderson looked to each of his colleagues, each one avoiding his gaze. All in favor? Isaac asked. Everyone but Phineas raised their hand. The ayes have it. Thank you, everyone. I'll draw up the paperwork tonight. Soon after, the conference room emptied, one by one, until Phineas and Anderson were all that remained. Eventually, Anderson also made his way towards the door.
How could you?
Phineas called out to him as he began to leave. Anderson did not bother to reply, exiting the conference room without a word or a glance back. The Secret Crest Pub was a small brew pub located in Portland's Pearl District. The fact that the property was owned and operated by a former director of Site 64 made it a popular destination for faculty personnel after their shifts ended. For this reason, Agents Shaw and Merlot found themselves sitting at a booth in a discreet corner of the bar. Do you know what Carter once called Gamma-13 after one of those times he had a few too many? Merlot asked Shaw, her hand firmly gripping her fourth pint. Not at all, Shaw replied with a light-hearted smile, well aware that her boss likely had a few too many as well. Asimov's fuck-ups, Merlot said with a grandiose wave of her hand. Not the most creative title, but Carter has a point. It's one step forward followed by 20 steps back. But hey, at least we aren't Alpha 9. Shaw chuckled before she finished her first pint. What happens to us now? She asked. Same thing that always happens after we drop the ball. Hallman will reassign our agents to help quell the local anarch-beat. Merlot answered with a sigh. She then looked over her companion and smiled. You'll fit right in, Shaw. The anarchists call us the Suits around here. Well then, Agent Shaw replied as another 2 pints were brought to the table. At least we have job security. Shaw then held her pint up to make a toast. To Asimov's fuck-ups. To Asimov's fuck-ups, Merlot replied. The two women clinked their glasses, both preparing to drown their frustration over the course of the night. And that's the end of the Elusive Anderson. Next time we'll be back with the Analog Kid. And one thing of note that I noticed on this read-through. Wilson? Like Wilson Wildlife Solution? Is it actually connecting? Is it happening? But for now, see you all later. Good luck out there.